What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on? Hopefully you came here to break down every single play of the Miami Dolphins Tennessee Titans game, because I did that tonight. Meticulous notes. I was dialed in. Didn't even watch the other game. Just kidding. But I will. Something did come to mind while I watched that game. Obviously, Detroit, Seattle was offensive explosion. If you like quarterback play, you like offensive coordinators. Ryan Grubb, Ben Johnson, as the kids say, in their bag. That was entertaining. If you like defense, if you're like Belichick, probably wasn't the most fun game to watch. Now, granted, we'll dive into it because I think there's some big takeaways for a team that had Super Bowl aspirations, another team that a lot of people were picking to be a sexy playoff team. And, props to Geno Smith. Dude, he takes a lot of heat from me. A lot of Seattle fans on our mailbag here are often asking, like, how do we get the next Russell? When do we find Jaden Daniels? It's like, well, you're kind of in this spot with this guy. God, he actually, sometimes when he lets it rip, you're like, geez, he's got a hose. He throws a harder ball than Goff. Who I wouldn't say Jared Goff's exactly, Matt Stafford back there slinging it around, but did not have an incompletion today. But we'll dive into it. Quick Outhouse Penthouse. It's not great right now in the NFL, especially in the NFC. You can't have that type of defensive performance. And even I get your 3-1, but Detroit, we need some better DB play. So we'll dive into that. And obviously a rough day in the sporting world, losing a couple legends. So hit on that before we get out of here. But before we dive into any of the Monday night action, Monday night doubleheader, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast, Game Time. The Detroit fans, now that their team is good, just always look like they're having such a good time. It's like that's the place to be. I saw baseball. The Mets clearly had to play some game that impacted the playoffs. They got in. I think the Diamondbacks didn't get in. If you want to go to one of these playoff baseball games, if you want to go to a football game this fall, obviously concerts, comedy shows, you name it, Game Time. They got flash deals, easy to search, venue, team, artist, you name it, use them because take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. There wasn't much defense played in that game. Let's call a spade a spade. Let's be real. But that was still really entertaining to watch. And after what I guess we had to witness, maybe I had to witness, because I felt contractually obligated doing this for a living to keep an eye on the other game. Though I did turn it off like 4 minutes left because I was out in the living room on the 2-box. But it was a lot of fun. And before we get negative or criticize, the offense in that game, the Lions are so loaded on offense. Jared Goff did not throw an incompletion. Now, he got bailed out on a pick play. Both teams ran pick plays late in that game where it's one thing to like kind of fake running a route and just pretend you're bumping into them. Both the guys ran out of their way and lowered their shoulders like they were defensive players. Definitely the Lions one was a really easy call. So he got bailed out, but he went 18-18. And the best Jared Goff is the version where you run the ball. And one thing that team has with their offensive line is Montgomery sets the tone early. You got Gibbs, who in theory is like this pass-catching outside runner, sweeps and stuff. But when you're hitting these, making these big holes, his speed, and it's just off and running. And then the balance they have in their passing game. Jameson Williams hits the big play. He's so fast. You get that guy in space. No one's catching him. No one is just more consistent and tough over the middle than St. Brown. Obviously, he threw a touchdown. And Laporta, when he's healthy, is a big-time weapon. So that offense is just freaking awesome. It's really, really complete. You could argue the only downfall of it being a quote unquote Super Bowl offense, and you saw it tonight, like one big difference between Geno and Jared is Geno can move a little bit. Jared Goff cannot. Even on the touchdown pass, it was like, is the DB going to catch him before the ball gets there? He's a relic. He's an old school throwback of a guy that can't move. And the way you take advantage of him is by hitting him and throwing him off. Because like Kirk Cousins, like all these old school, pocket passers, and those guys are never on the level of like the Peytons and the Elis, is when you hit them, you throw off their offense because they can't ad lib. There is no ad lib ability. Where on the flip side, Geno, who Seattle, same thing. Now, Seattle's offensive line clearly is not on the level of Detroit's, but just in terms of offensive weapons, like I'm sorry, Aaron Glenn, and listen, I like Carlton Davis, or at least have in the past. You guys draft a first-round corner from Alabama, but you get to the point, like, and I know you're trying to switch up coverages, man-to-man defense against DK Metcalf, who's 6'4", 235 pounds, and runs a 4.3, is probably not going to go great. And it was a disaster most of the night. Honestly, I would have thrown to DK more. He looks like Terrell Owens when they run him on that little drag route. Jackson Smith's a stud. Tyler Lockett's been one of the more underappreciated players in the league. Kenneth Walker got, what's the guy's name? Mel Tucker, a $95 million contract. 1 year, Michigan State ran for like 1,900 yards. They won like 10 or 11 games. Mel Tucker was terrible. Obviously had some other issues off the field, but it was that dude who is a stud. So a lot like Detroit, I mean, that offense is really loaded. And let's face it, he takes a lot of criticism, and I'm one because I go, yeah, he's kind of mid, kind of average. But you go, well, obviously from an intangible stuff, checks all the boxes. From an arm strength standpoint, I wouldn't call it a 10 out of 10, but it's definitely, I don't know, 8.5. Like, he's got a really, really good arm. He's really mobile. He can ad-lib, made some plays with his legs. And, like, he was pretty unreal tonight. And if the Detroit Lions, who I thought were a legitimate Super Bowl contender, I can just remove Brian Branch, who is an excellent player, and your defense look like one of the worst teams in the league, I can't take you as seriously. I know you're 3-1. I like your coaching staff. I like a lot of your core players, clearly. But when you can't cover anybody, and you'd be like, well, John, is DK Metcalf. Well, who plays in their division? Who is undefeated? The Minnesota Vikings. Who do they have? I don't know. Justin Jefferson. Oh, yeah. Jordan Addison. How are they going to cover those two guys? I mean, that's a matchup. The way they're playing, I do not like. And listen, the Packers have been a little all over the map. One thing they do have is a lot of explosive offensive weapons. And even with the interceptions Jordan Love has thrown when he's played, they've thrown up a lot of points. They can really score. So Detroit, those are their corners. They're going to have to figure out, like, their defensive coordinator loves calling man-to-man defense. Like, they're playing a lot of teams with a lot of offensive firepower, and it was not pretty. And listen, you won against a team. You talk about bad defense. Seattle had no chance. Leonard Williams out. Byron Murphy out. I mean, their two best defensive linemen were inactive, and they're missing like several other starting linebackers. As Troy said, when Love goes out of the game with a quad injury, it's like, they were already missing 5 starters, and he's one of their better players. It's like, you better slice and dice him. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from Ben Johnson or Ryan Grubb. Both guys were excellent. But that defense, that's not playoff defense. You should light them up like a Christmas tree. And Ben Johnson, who might be the best trick play caller in the league right now, for a long period of time, it was Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator version, with the Pats. He always had a great knack for calling the perfect trick play. Ben Johnson last week, hook and ladder touchdown. This week, the touchdown pass to Jared Goff. Like, listen, dude is an awesome offensive coordinator, and they needed him because that defense, and this is the thing, like, I hate being critical after you just score 42 points, but they easily could have given up 45 points. I mean, the defense was that atrocious. And let's face it, one of their touchdowns came on a drive from Seattle early in the game where DK's dragging like 7 guys, breaking a tackle, gets hit by the 4th defender, and the ball pops out. And that led to a touchdown. So it's like, it's just not going to work. And it's partly me fired up because I like this team a lot coming into the season. I love watching their offense, but one thing that is a non-negotiable, it's a non-negotiable. You cannot compete in the playoffs, let alone make it to the Super Bowl or win one, if your defense sucks. Even in a league, this year's a little off because the offense has been bad just around the league, but you can't play like that. Not that level of pass defense. And Seattle, like, I'm giving them a little bit of a pass on defense because I like Mike McDaniel a lot more than Aaron Glenn. Like, Mike McDaniel, you could argue, now that he's not a defensive coordinator, is as good as it gets. Like, and one thing I appreciate about him, you got Robert Saleh and all these other defensive coordinators, these young guys that get hired and they become a CEO. What's Mike McDaniel doing? Calling the fucking plays. So props to that guy who looks fantastic. For a guy that did not play college football, dude looks like he could be taking snaps in the league. So Seattle impressed me. They are, I know their defense was atrocious, but if you get those guys back, and I think the big question mark is they play the Niners, not this upcoming weekend, but on Thursday. So in 10 days. And that's a massive, massive game. And if they don't have those guys back, the Niners better take advantage of it because you better get them now. Because if they get those guys back, Leonard Williams, one of the better defensive linemen in the league, Byron Murphy many people thought he was a top 10 pick. People thought Atlanta was crazy for taking Penix over him. But that was really, really entertaining. There's a reason offensive coordinators in the NFL make a lot of money. And Ryan Grubb, Seattle's offensive coordinator, anytime a guy comes, a lot of guys make the transition, but they start as position coaches and they work their way up. This guy was a lifetime college guy, went with DeBoer to Alabama because he's been his right-hand guy forever. And then John Schneider called. Never worked in the pros. And I was confident because I'm confident in that kind of operation. Like, this guy knows what he's doing, but you never know. Working with pros, a lot different than college. Uncommon opponents. You don't know the schemes of the defenses. And he has hit the ground running. He looks fantastic. I mean, we've known about Ben Johnson. The dude's turning down head coaching jobs. But when you talk about a guy who throws his hat in the ring right away, like, is Ryan Grubb getting interviews? I mean, that's pretty impressive. I mean, Geno's been good the last couple of years. Looked on a little different level in that game. So thanks for entertaining us, Detroit, Seattle. I love touchdowns. Tutties, taking it to the house, in for 6. I call them tugs. Whenever you call a touchdown, one thing's for sure. Touchdowns matter more at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. On the ground, in the air, special teams or defense, we do not care how they score them. We want to bet on touchdowns. And DraftKings Sportsbook is delivering. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something as simple like picking a player to score a touchdown or how many touchdowns will be in a game. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Ready to do a touchdown dance on your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN, J-O-H-N. That's code JOHN. New customers get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Not much to talk about in Tennessee and Miami. I'm probably one of the rare guys who talks for a living who kind of has been like, the Mike McDaniel hype's a little much. This is before the season started. He has so many good friends in the media. Let's face it, everyone I know in the NFL constantly makes fun of him, about the dress and the way everyone kind of slurps him. It's like he's never won a big game. Honestly, his teams have crumbled down the stretch. But I'm going to take it easy on him tonight. Like, I don't think Bill Walsh could have won that game with Tyler Huntley. And I've always said this about the Tua situation. I understand Tua's value to their team. Now, I thought they were going to be like a 7-win team this season, but like Tua has made them credible these last couple of years. And there's an economic value to that. In my opinion, it's like $80, $90 million, like Daniel Jones' contract. But it's like, well, what about his stats? Well, it's like, yeah, you can't beat anyone that's good, and you got no chance in the playoffs with him. So if you're going to give him 150, $160 million, but you already know the end game. And it actually gets harder because once he starts making that much money, it gets harder to have your team as good. And they weren't going to be as good this season, but they got no shot without him. And that's where I said, like, that value of the Kirk Cousins deal, the Derek Carr deal, there's value in that if you're just in the playoff mix. But you remove that guy, and they got other issues. Their defense is terrible. They're a joke. And the thing that crossed my mind tonight, should the Kansas City Chiefs trade for him? And I was going to open the show with that. Then I did a little digging, talked to some birdies, and then it's like, that is 100% not happening. Like, the Chiefs aren't going back down that road. That's an X. They're not calling for a booty call, even in a situation like this where they're they got Worthy, me, you, and Travis Kelce. And financially, it would be complicated. His cap hits $18 million. Their cap space is under $5 million. Now, you can change things around, but I'm told that's not happening. Even though, like, my first thought was, God, he just plug and play. I bet it'd be sweet. He's still really good. I do think Miami should trade him. Like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what's the point of having him on the team in a situation where, thank God the Patriots are on your schedule, because I don't think you beat anybody. I think that version, removing Tua with Tyler Huntley, they're the worst team in the league. So if you're not playing the Patriots, who ironically they play this week, any other team, think about the other bad teams, the Jags, the Giants, Tennessee, with Tyler Huntley, I would take that other team to win that game. And I don't think that's some crazy hot take. Miami is that putrid. They were unwatchable tonight. And Tyreek Hill has such a unique skill set. Hey, you can still hand him the ball off and get him on reverses. But a huge part of his game is down the field throws. And he's completely useless. I mean, completely useless. And how often do you trade a guy or trade for a guy who's an all-time Hall of Fame player, and you trade a first-round pick for him? And they traded more, I think like first, second, or fourth or something. But you could trade him right now for a first-round pick. Like, teams in the mix would trade for him. Now, if the Chiefs don't, factor in there, you'd have to say the Ravens. Would the Bills sniff around? Would any team in the NFL, in the NFC, be interested? Would the Cowboys trade a first-round pick for him? I mean, I think you'd have to entertain that. So I don't think any Cowboy fans would complain if they did that. They've been drafting offensive linemen the last couple of years. Figure out the finances later. Now, again, I haven't looked at all the like, you would have to restructure money. It's complicated, or have them eat some of it. But my point is, he has no value on the Miami Dolphins. None. And let's face it, with this Tua situation, they no longer can view Tua as their starting quarterback. You cannot do that. They are in the quarterback drafting mode. That's not an opinion. That's just a fact at this point. So the easiest way to rebuild your team is to start selling off parts. And the one part you have that still has a ton of value because of his talent, because of his game-changing ability, and because he's a proven winner, is that guy. And his value to you, now with Tyler Huntley or Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle or Mike fucking McDaniel taking snaps, is basically zero. Zilch. So if you can trade a first-round pick for him, to me, I would trade him this week. I wouldn't even wait. Like, I wouldn't even wait till the trading deadline. Like, trade him now. Don't risk injury. Don't risk any situation of just, he starts saying weird stuff. In fairness to him, I'd be frustrated too. I would pull the trigger as soon as possible. I would place some calls. We are open for business. Do I think they will? I don't have that much faith in like what's going on there, but that is the right business move. And honestly, I don't even really think it's that debatable at this point in time. So I have nothing to say on the Tennessee Titans. Absolutely nothing. I know Will Levis sprained his shoulder, could have come back in. Maybe he couldn't have. Brian Callahan could not wait to go to the bullpen. I don't think we see Will Levis again. That game, though, Tyler Huntley versus Will Levis / Mason Rudolph, is a 10 a.m. West Coast kickoff where nobody watches beside the fans of those two teams. And if you got one TV with 4 boxes, it is, and there's 7 games going on, it is 100% number 7 on the list. So it's like, thank God, not a big Monday night doubleheader guy at all. But if that game is going to just be in the background of another game that's really entertaining, I can live with it. So if I'm the Dolphins, pick up those phones, start making some calls. Quick outhouse and penthouse because we do it every week after the Monday night games. Becomes a little harder this week when you look at the penthouse. To me, there are only three teams in the AFC. I've had the Chiefs in. I said they are on scholarship. They are just in the penthouse. They own they own a second property which they lease out. Like they ain't getting kicked out. They could have a bad week and lose. They are in all season long until they lose. I'm sorry. The Bills, after playing on Monday night, going on the road to a team that was must win, like I'm not budging them either. I will insert the Ravens because the last 2 weeks, they've won the first half by about 50 points against the Cowboys and the Bills. They're good, is as good as anyone. The problem for them is like their good is actually better than everyone, but their good only stays in the regular season and then it disappears in the postseason. But like the version of the Ravens, we saw the first half against the Cowboys and the majority of that game, it's like, yes, that's an elite team. So it's like the AFC is pretty easy. The NFC is a little more difficult. Like, I'm sorry, I can't put the Lions. Obviously, Minnesota's in. They've been the story of the year. Sam Darnold's looked like Joe Montana. Kevin O'Connell is just, and Brian Flores are kicking everyone's ass on a weekly basis. If they win this week in over, international seas against the Jets, we're going to start talking about this team. Like, are they like a 15-2 team? Uh, I can't put the Lions in with that defensive performance. I think the 49ers are still really good, but you don't get to go in when you blow a 10-point lead to the Rams playing with a bunch of randos and Matt Stafford. Like I'm just looking around the NFC, it's like Cowboys no, Eagles definitely no. I can't quite put Washington in though. They are, if you go to the Commanders Twitter or Instagram and watch the in-game Dan Quinn giving the ball to Cliff, the game ball, they got some good vibes going on there. I don't think their team's talented enough. Their defense isn't that good. And we'll see if their offensive line can hold up. But they're a vibe right now. They're a vibe. They've gone from like, yeah, this quarterback's kind of fun to who are the Commanders playing this week? So the South, like I can't put the Bucks in. Big night for the Bucks. You beat Atlanta. You're 4-1. Take you pretty seriously. Obviously, New Orleans has come back to earth. So the NFC is off. The NFC is just off. And the outhouse, obviously Jacksonville. Cincinnati wins. Carolina won a couple weeks ago. And Carolina's actually been much more credible with Andy Dalton. They're not some joke. I have to insert Miami. Like that is a dog trash team. That is terrible. I mean, that is an unwatchable product. Tennessee essentially kicked your ass. They were in it, but now that you remove Will Levis, they still stink, but they're way better than you. They just played you on the road, so I'm going to remove them, insert Miami, who is just awful. And them versus the Pats, who are also awful and easily in this list, or on this list. That is a game I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy forced to watch in jail. So anyone that watches that game, props to you. I will follow it on an app or something. But that's a bad, bad, bad football game. The thing with Jacksonville, like I watched Jacksonville this morning against Houston, watched them a couple times throughout the season. They're 0-4 and they're probably headed toward not many wins, but they are dramatically better than like Miami and the Pats. But you're 0-4. Your coach is getting testy with the old media. You go in the outhouse with Miami and in the Pats. But I think we'd all agree if you just watch Jacksonville play, they are better than Miami and New England. Before we get out of here, two guys. One, I was born in the 80s, so I was born in 1984. My birthday is right around the corner. Be the big 4-0, and became a huge sports fan as you come into your own in the 90s. And I say this all the time about the NBA. What kind of just makes me sad now about the NBA, the way it is with no one playing and the diminished viewership and all the negativity around it. When I grew up, and anyone that watched The Last Dance, I don't think people can comprehend, any young person, how big Michael Jordan was in the 90s. The NBA was on the same level. At the time, baseball was huge as well. In the NFL, it was a power broker sport. And Michael was the king alpha. But the next like 20 guys, the best players in the league, were really, really famous. And kids all over the country owned all sorts of jerseys and shorts of different teams. And from Charles Barkley to Akeem Olajuwon to Shaquille O'Neal to you name it. Now, I wouldn't put this guy on the level in terms of as a player. Like I wouldn't, he wouldn't be a top 10 player I'd pick from the 90s, but he was a really famous player associated in that era. I think many would consider him the best defensive big man of the time. And I saw Charles Barkley today on Instagram had a very touching post about Dikembe Mutombo. Mutombo. Dikembe Mutombo was just really, really famous. And obviously, when he made the block and he'd wag the finger, and everyone from that I follow on Instagram that's an NBA player of that era, Shaq to Charles Barkley to you name it, they all talk about the human being and not the player. And he's a Hall of Fame player, but that sucks. I mean, to die at 56 years old. It's one thing. Pete Rose, who we'll mention next. I mean, that guy was in his 80s, lived a full life. You get cut short at 56. I mean, I'm 16 years away from that. It's just not very old. And luckily, I think Charles Barkley said, like, the world got worse today. And, I don't think Charles is one to mince words on stuff like that. This guy, he's known for probably 35, 40 years. So just a sad, sad day losing to Dikembe Mutombo. And then Pete Rose, who I would say, listen, I never watched him play before my time. I obviously never watched him manage. He was already kicked out of baseball. But I would say of people that, like, OJ committed murder. So it's hard to top that. But I would put Pete Rose in my youth as the most polarizing discussion because baseball used to drive sports talk and whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame. Obviously, as a player, he's a no doubt about it. Sure, first ballot, one of the all time greats. And he has a documentary that I think he was a big part of the production. I think it's on Showtime. I watched it. It was really good. And it really puts into perspective just how great his teams were in the 70s on Cincinnati, his story about finally admitting to gambling on baseball. Obviously, we're a lot more numb to gambling, but one rule that's never going to change is you're not going to be allowed to bet on your sport. And I think a lot of people thought that he bet on his team. But I would say Pete Rose is on the short list of most famous baseball players of all time. I think it's hard to top, I don't know, Babe Ruth. But when you factor in the on the field and off the field, I think you could make the argument that Pete Rose is easily one of the five most famous baseball players of all time. And I also think when you factor in when he played baseball, it was way bigger than the NFL. It was bigger. I mean, the NBA wasn't even that big in the 70s. It was by far the most important thing in this country. And he was arguably on given seasons, I don't know, the most valuable player, one of, if not the best player on his own team, which was full of all time great players. And the way that it all happened, it's just kind of a sad, sad story. But, I think the one thing that has never changed what Charlie Hustle stood for is just playing hard. And I still think in life, whether you're a young athlete, whether from a work ethic standpoint of just working really hard, just doing something full out, I don't know if that will ever change. And I know technology and the world is changing even as we speak, but I still think the most successful people in every field have a similar mindset to Pete Rose in which the way he played baseball. So it's just a sad day in the sports world losing Dikembe Mutombo and Pete Rose. I mean, two obviously I would say polar opposite the way they're discussed, but two legendary sports names. I know in my life where sports has, I don't know, been the driving force of my life.